Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. Joining us today, one of our regular contributors, a man who's been on the State of the Nation many times, always makes himself available, which is fantastic. And he's got some news, and that is Michael Beaumont from Action SA. Michael, welcome back to the State of the Nation. Good to have you here.
It's always good to be here. Thanks, Mike.
You've recently, Action SA has been a busy little party, not old, busy little party, right? You've been talking about creating coalitions or blocks and then announced quite a big deal. Do you want to tell people about it?
Yeah, I think so. But just if you will indulge me a moment, we must talk about the context in which these things are taking place, because the lay of the land politically in South Africa is rapidly evolving. And as with anything business or politics, if you don't evolve with it, you will become a dinosaur.
Yes.
And you need to be very aware of that external environment. So nationally, you have this colossal GNU government that's been pulled together. It's now 70% of the South African Parliament, all in cabinet, which, is quite concerning just from that point of view alone, because if you've seen power corrupt in South Africa, well, this should really, be most alarming. You've got the regressive caucus on the other side that, say, amusingly is falling apart and not providing any real opposition. And the work of providing an opposition and an alternative of a rational nature to South Africans is falling upon a fairly narrow group of parties that are sitting in the middle of these major forces, which Action SA is the biggest party of that group. And certainly we see it as the need to lead a group of parties together to provide a strong alternative, particularly when you look at a GNU where, and I'm sure we will get a chance just now, it's some real concern setting in already that this initial optimism that South Africans had towards this thing may have been misplaced. And in fact, it looks like this is a multi-party implementing agency of ANC policy, which is taking shape that way. In that environment, an alternative is becoming more and more important. If you look local government, I mean, I don't need to tell you or anyone who drives around municipalities in our country to see how broken they are and how many more people every day are living in dysfunctional municipalities that have been led by a very narrow group of parties for a very long time. So in that environment, it's absolutely critical that we strengthen the alternative. Action SA, hand on heart, didn't have the election result we wanted in 2024. We've been quite open about that. But we are convinced that there is space that we must occupy and we must take our space. So we have adopted a series of strategies that we'll be embarking upon, one of which is we need to assimilate the rational centre and the opposition in South Africa, because, Mike, we have 600 political parties. We have ballot papers that are starting to become like those comic scrolls that you see in a cartoon when it just like rolls down the road kind of thing.
Like a Harry Potter series.
Yeah, it's getting silly now.
Less enjoyable.
Yeah, true. And at the end of the day, we need to present South Africans with perhaps fewer options, but better options. And I think that's what we're working to do. So it's going to involve talking to a number of political parties. We have an active program of doing so. There are some really interesting talks going on right now with parties represented in Parliament, which is understandably where a lot of people want to focus their attention in reporting this news. But I must also tell you, Mike, there's a misunderstanding here of local government, because a party that has MPs doesn't necessarily help you in a local government context. Some of the new parties in Parliament have 0 councillors, and we're approaching a local government election where the ANC and DA appear to be cooperating around this piece of legislation called the Municipal Structures Amendment Bill, which is a mouthful, but the relevant part for this discussion is that it's going to bring in a 1% threshold. And that basically means that in a lot of those municipalities, particularly the smaller towns in South Africa, which are really broken, those residents-type associations and those business fora that stand in local government elections have little chance of representation in gaining it. And the work of Action SA and others in bringing people together under this umbrella is going to be an important part for them to give expression to their work.
So are you against the 1% threshold?
No, I think it's an issue we've debated. We think it's actually a good thing. It's obviously got its challenges, and we need to understand that our constitution talks about the multi-party nature of our democracy. which is something that has to be safeguarded. But as with anything, it cannot be an unbalanced right. It needs to be balanced against other things. And let's probably recognize that living in Johannesburg as residents, you and I have suffered a degree of instability by political parties that quite frankly shouldn't be in council, where, a Colleen Makubele or a Kabelo Gwamanda, they're in councils occupying really important roles, or were, with 3,000 votes out of a voters' roll of 1.8 million. And I think that's a perversion of what was intended by a multi-party democracy. So we think it's a good idea, but we need to watch carefully that it's not being driven for narrow political interests as well.
Yeah, because you started this by saying, if it's a genuine civic organization or a business forum or whatever, they're going to be denied access because of this 1% threshold. But now you're giving me great reasons why it should be there.
Well, I think the fact that they don't achieve 1%, you shouldn't be guaranteed representation if you get less than 1%. I'm not making that case. I'm saying they're going to find it hard to gain representation with a 1% threshold. And what it encourages, again, which I think is a good thing, is the assimilation of political groups together to provide a more credible interest, which, in the South African environment where there are too many parties, there is, voter overload when it comes to election time in terms of political parties and the spread of acronyms that people, quite frankly, have never heard of before when they get to a ballot booth. I don't think that's helpful to our democratic process. If we are trying to present South Africans with clear alternatives to very significant blocks that have arisen between the GNU and this regressive caucus, then we're going to need to present a more credible bloc as an alternative to both.
Now, you mentioned Johannesburg earlier, and the mess that is Johannesburg. And to anybody that is out there that's not a Joburg citizen, and you have been in Joburg in the past, but perhaps not for a while, I would urge you to come and have a look at Johannesburg. It is Gotham City. The place is falling apart. You can't ride down the road without encountering a manhole, never mind a pothole. And then none of the traffic lights, not none of the traffic lights, but every second traffic light doesn't work, and the street lights are a lottery. But yet the people that are running the city decided to give themselves an increase, something which Action SA stood behind, a salary increase for those council members as approved by your speaker in Johannesburg.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure which way Action SA voted on that. I'd actually have to look that up.
It's public, yeah.
Well,
public knowledge.
It may be. I can tell you there's instances There's instances where Action SA has opposed increases, and there's instances where we have approved increases.
So do you think that Johannesburg Metro deserves increased prices?
I don't think that's the helpful way of looking at it. I think the helpful way of looking at it is you have 270 elected councillors in the city of Johannesburg who are meant to play a really important role in interfacing between communities and government. And in fact, Mike, I think the fact that the municipality is broken increases the importance of the role of those councillors, because what I've seen firsthand...
So pay them more, they'll do a better job, is what you're saying.
Give me a little bit more of a chance to tell you what I'm saying. But what I'm getting at here is that when you have broken municipalities, a lot more weight falls on councillors. Because when the call centres don't get answered, when the emails don't get responded to, when incorrect bills are not being resolved, etc., councillors bear a lot of that burden. And the question you've got to ask yourself is multi-year denial of even an inflationary-based increase over many years a good thing for the interface between communities and government if councillors are playing that role? I don't think so. I think what that actually ends up doing is producing a scenario where the election of future councillors becomes a race to the bottom because people who could bring value to those roles just find that economically they can't afford to be a councillor because it's too low of a salary, etc. And these are things we're going to have to look at. I mean, the city of Tshwane, which we have a mayor in, and no doubt we'll get to that, has just approved a salary increase, and we stand behind it. It's the first one in 5 years. Can you imagine, people having no salary increase for 5 years when inflation in the last 5 years has gone up by what, 30, 35%? At the end of the day, that's going to have an impact on the caliber of people who apply to be councillors in the future, which is detrimental to communities again. So I don't think it's it's as simple as saying, being pro-communities is being pro-blocking salary increases. I think you've got to look at it as a more complex issue.
But can we think about it for a second from the resident point of view. We have not seen value for what we are paying. There's been scandal upon scandal. Water doesn't run through the taps.
Sure. But let me just respond to that, because when you say from a resident point of view, I dealt with that answer entirely from a resident point of view, because when the city is broken, councillors become the vital interface between residents and the broken municipality. More weight lands on them to carry the burden of a failing municipality. If your councillors will not reapply for those positions in the future because the cost of living has gone up by 35% and they're still earning what they were 5 years ago, then you're going to have a lower caliber of councillors coming in. And certainly, Mike, I will be the first to tell you where people are poor performing from a public rep and a politician point of view. And it's true, there are some serious failures in Johannesburg, but there are also some very good councillors, people who do good work on behalf of their communities in spite of a failing municipality. And in many ways, they're becoming, the last hope for residents who otherwise would have no service.
So how do we get the service that we need? We pay councillors more, right? That's a start. Nothing about the call centres or the delivery. Does that where does that come in the pecking order of actions?
Well, I think to be fair, if you'd asked me about that, I would have pointed out that is vital.
Yes.
You asked me about salary increases, so I think being a bit unfair there. But when you're talking about how it must be done to fix Johannesburg, it's very clear. It's being poorly led. We have a mayor who is not providing much inspiration at the top. He's openly said that we shouldn't expect much from him in a couple of years.
I defend him because he's the one honest politician I've ever said. He said he'd do nothing, he's doing nothing.
Yeah, well, perhaps slightly more ambition would be a strong thing.
Yeah.
And from our point of view, I think it's quite important to just respond to your last remark there. We're not part of a coalition there. We vote independently of that coalition. We voted against that coalition in this appointment of an acting city manager on Friday last week, because it's an individual that Herman Mashaba investigated for wrongdoing when he was the mayor of Joburg. So I think it's unfair to say that we're keeping him in power. We take up a role in the legislature, not the executive, so we can hold that government to account, because we have this problem in Johannesburg, Mike, where we were involved with the DA government and other political parties that was making progress in a number of ways. We had people in that government who were really performing as well. And then, as we've discussed before, the DA detonated that arrangement and refused on no less than 4 occasions to take back government in any configuration we offered them to do. Even to the point where Action SA was going to give up 2 of its 3 MMCs to the Patriotic Alliance so that government would continue. And the DA refused for Action SA to make that sacrifice. I mean, can you imagine they're not willing to let another party make a sacrifice? It reveals an agenda that they just didn't want to be involved in government there. Because while they made the whole thing about the PA, the reality is the PA is still in government now, but with these other parties. So it was always going to happen. The question was who was going to be around them. And so if they are not going to be willing to be involved in government, Action SA is going to have to find a way that we can deliver value to residents. And we've chosen from a Johannesburg point of view not to enter the executive because we have major concerns about how it's being led and run, but rather to enter the legislature to hold government to account rather than being in the opposition and not being able to do anything meaningful.
Well, we had your speaker, Mthembu, here quite soon after she was installed as a speaker, elected to that position. I've been trying to get hold of her to come back. We haven't. And just to get some kind of feedback as to, at that point she said, as you would, be patient. It'll happen. If the residents have a problem, they should have a protest. That was her words, not mine. So failing that, or can you give us an update as to what progress has been made in the city of Johannesburg?
Yeah, certainly. And I think your characterization of her remarks are also quite unfortunate again.
I'm not characterizing.
Yeah, but I think to suggest that her approach is that if residents have a problem, they must protest is a vast oversimplification and deliberately designed to misrepresent her position.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of good work going on there. And I know that, Mike, because as a political party and as a leader in my party, we're involved in a regular program with our mayor in Tshwane and our speaker in Joburg. We met them as recently as Monday to sit and go through what it is they are doing from a point of view of the legislature, which has very particular powers and can't deliver services, but has to hold government to account in terms of the use of how we deliver motions, how we have special council meetings to debate issues of urgent importance, how we have oversight visits to failing service delivery projects across the city. And we are very pleased to see that there's more and more of these things that are currently taking place, to the point where we are now going to be launching a tracker Just like we've done of the GNU government nationally for its performance, we're now going to be launching our local government tracker, which will be tracking what performance the residents of Tshwane are getting from Mayor Nasipi Moya, and what the residents of Joburg are getting from an oversight and accountability point of view from our speaker, because we are serious about the fact that there must be metrics, and those metrics must be publicly available for people to see. But what is important in that process, it is clearly understood that the role of the speaker cannot deliver services. The role of the speaker is to hold government to account and to ensure things happen the right way from a legislative point of view, and that's the work that is going on now.
Okay, so more meetings are being held, but we shouldn't expect traffic lights to start working.
Again, it's an unfortunate characterization of what I'm saying, because what you call a meeting, I call a team of councillors going with service providers to failed infrastructure projects around the city and holding those service providers and officials to account for those failures so that a turnaround can begin. You rather ungenerously call that a meeting. I call that really important oversight work on behalf of residents living in communities suffering under failing infrastructure projects.
What is an infrastructure project?
Well, I mean, you have renewals of roads, you have replacement of old pipes, you have refurbishment of substations. These are all infrastructure projects that are ongoing in the city. The city has a capex budget of around 8 billion rand and about 3,500 projects that are on its books at any given point in time, going from the relatively small to the massive. And every one of those projects has service providers, officials in government departments supposed to be monitoring those projects. And the oversight role of the legislature, led by our speaker, is to ensure there are visits to these sites, there are inspections as to the progress that is taking place there. There's assessments as to whether these projects are being delivered on budget and in time, and where there are problems, that people can be held to account. The idea of an executive, especially, God forbid, in Johannesburg, after what we've seen, simply being in charge of these things without legislative oversight, you can only imagine how bad things would be without that.
You mentioned those magic words, held to account. What does that look like?
Well, I think when you've got service providers that aren't delivering, there are many mechanisms available to the city, including the penalty fees that are involved in contracts for late projects or projects that are not performing to standard, or ultimately the cancellation of projects in the most extreme measure, where a service provider needs to be removed and replaced with one who's going to get the job done. What's quite important to say, Mike, is when you consider the kind of monies involved in local government, yes, there is a funding problem of local government, but there's also a problem in extracting value for the funds that are being expended. In other words, if the city is putting down 200 million rand for the renewal of a road between point A and point B, the question is that being done to standard? Is it being done in a manner that's not going to have to be redone in a few years' time? Are the residents getting 200 million rands worth of value out of that? And that kind of accountability becomes very important from a legislative point of view in order to achieve that. I think it's also important to say that all of what I'm describing didn't start last year. This is the role of opposition, and this is the role of the legislature, and has been since the advent of our democracy. So the fact that Action SA is performing this role is not new. It's an important role that needs to be performed.
Now, you've mentioned the arrogance of the DA, which is a well-established part of the South African firmament. I don't think even the most hardened DA member, office bearer, could deny their arrogance. It's off the charts. And that was one of the reasons why, Herman has said repeatedly, and so have you, that they are impossible to deal with. So fine, they're now out of the picture. Are you now finding your new partners to be less arrogant and very effective?
I think it's quite important to say, Mike, that we've taken a very deliberate view to stop making statements about political parties at a global level, to say we will only work with these or we won't work with these, because ultimately what we've realized as a young political party that perhaps had some learning to do is that when you do that, you put yourself in a corner. Case in point is Tshwane. We'd been saying we'll never work with the ANC, we'll definitely tie ourselves to the hips with that bunch of parties. But when government was failing consistently over many years, what do? Stick there because you said so? No, you got to reevaluate, and you need to assess what is the best option for the residents of that municipality and service delivery.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, to answer your question, I must tell you what's going on in Tshwane is really, really good.
Energetic mayor.
Well, energetic mayor, but
has
to answer...
been great, and it would be great if she came onto the show. Mayor Moya, please, I can't invite you any more times, we're going to run out of airtime if I keep on sending you invitations. It would be great to have her.
I'd be more than happy to facilitate, because I think your viewers would really like that.
Yeah, so would I.
She's doing great work. And one of the things that I think people are finding refreshing about her, she's not about the politics. She's there about service delivery. It's what she's doing every day, day in and day out. She knows that city like the back of her hand, and she is delivering across Tshwane, which we think is refreshing and a great change. From our point of view, to answer your question, we're finding that our partners in that municipality are being hugely supportive on one hand, but being hugely constructive in the work of government. Decisions are being taken with the support of others, and decisions are being taken across the things that people said would never happen. So the fight against wrongdoing is continuing in that municipality, and in fact, I would say getting stronger. We've just had the situation where the Rooival 5 have come back courtesy of a mishandling of a disciplinary process by the previous government. And I see that many people try to say, Action SA won't be able to take tough stand here because of their partners. Well, we've taken the tough stand. The appeal's been lodged. The people remain on suspension, and we're going to have to fix what was done wrong in that process in the first instance. And it was done unanimously with the support of the people we're governing with there. So at the end of the day, we've got a strong team and a mayoral committee that appear to be working cohesively together. But the fact that it's working well in Tshwane doesn't mean it's working well in Joburg, where we have very public opinions about what's going wrong there. And the attitude of the ANC towards government there is much more concerning to us, and there appears to be much less receptiveness to correcting those issues. So that's why I say, Mike, it's really important to look at each instance on its merits, rather than trying to say blanket that these guys are good, these guys are bad. We've got to see where we can deliver value.
Okay, so city of Tshwane, I haven't been there personally myself in a little while. Street lights working, traffic lights working, potholes are being repaired.
Well, I think that would be a fairly obscene standard to try and have achieved in a matter of 3 months. But what I can tell you is this: the count of street lights repaired since we've taken over is over 9,000 street lights. The backlog on potholes has been eradicated on the reported potholes. Now, obviously, that's what's reported, not what has to be dealt with proactively at the end of December. And already we're starting to see some pretty serious governance changes that are improving the situation. We've got the delivery of clean water to the residents of Hammanskraal for the first time in 18 years, which is, let's just say, significant in the extreme. Yeah. You've got the stabilization of the debt situation with Eskom, which had ballooned to over 7 billion rand and was threatening supply of electricity to Tshwane, which has now been stabilized. The labor environment is busy being attended to in terms of that contingent liability produced by the kind of Margaret Thatcher-esque kind of approach to unions by the previous government. So, there's a lot that's moving in the right direction, but it's also been 3 months. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they're all working and everything's sorted. What I am saying to you is over the next year to 18 months, it looks like the residents of Tshwane are universally, across the geography of the city, going to be experiencing better government and in a way that is, relevant in their lives.
I've got to hand it to Action SA. They do appear to be by far, and I say this absolutely hand on heart, the only party that seems to have any energy in the Gauteng area and any will to do anything better. Right? Everybody else just either doesn't speak at all, a la the ANC. We just never hear what we're not sure what the Patriotic Alliance are doing other than accusing prominent political leaders of having drug problems. But you appear to be the only party with any kind of energy in the Gauteng area, and that has to be rewarded at the local government election.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's something that we are mindful of, because when you look at the situation in the municipalities in Gauteng, particularly Johannesburg, and hopefully getting better all the time, Tshwane, residents have really suffered. And I think there's a genuine despair when people contemplate local government, municipal services going forward. I don't think too many people are looking to say that they think the future is better right now in respect of those services. And there's an urgency that has to be attended to from our point of view in how we respond to those issues and how we find ourselves mirroring the atmosphere and the mood of residents, which I think certainly, if you feel that that's what we're doing, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing to see anybody who's actually prepared to stand up and at least acknowledge the problems. That's the first step. We haven't seen any resolution, certainly not in Joburg, to those problems. But it's refreshing to hear somebody saying, shit, let's fix it, because DA cut and run. They seem to be happy in the Western Cape, and good luck to them. ANC, as you said, Mayor said he's going to do nothing, and he's true to his word. And the rest, God knows what they're doing. But the point is that, very frustrated residents, we are constantly being told to hang on, it's coming, we're meeting, we first need more money, we need this, we need that. It would be nice, it's nice to hear somebody saying services are going to be delivered.
Yeah, well, I think we've got to give people something to believe in. And going back to your first question and talking about why we're assimilating these political parties and perhaps answering that question at a local government level orientation more, this is why we are convinced that we have to build the alternative. Local government has been controlled by a very narrow group of political parties. You would have to say that 90% of South Africa's municipalities are led by the ANC, the DA, or the IFP, if you talk about a KZN regional kind of perspective.
Pretty sure it's bigger than 90%, but anyway.
May well be, yes. But the point is, if the experience of local government over the long term, despite the leadership of those municipalities, has been as problematic as it has been, I think one of the reasons you've got 45% of voters turning out to vote is that the view is the alternative is not strong enough. And that's why assimilating parties in that environment is important. And just kind of to talk a little bit about that discussion earlier, because I neglected to mention that the Forum for Service Delivery is the party we announced last week is coming on board. They have 38 councillors, and they have achieved that with basically no resources whatsoever. This is a genuinely grassroots type organization. They are in 5 provinces, and bringing them on board creates a footprint for Action SA immediately in those places where Action SA currently doesn't have councillors. And I think this is why we want to look very seriously across the municipalities we are looking at for a 2026 election to see how we can bring on board those local government service delivery, resident association oriented type fora under an umbrella so that we can mount a very serious challenge to a very hopeless situation in local government.
So is Forum for Service Delivery going to be merged with Action SA?
Yes, Action SA is the party on the ballot paper. The nature of what we have concluded means that they are going to be assimilated within the Action SA structures. But at the same time, we do so modestly and humbly to avoid the kind of arrogance in these arrangements that typically breed instability. Yeah. You can imagine to cede a position of the Deputy President is a fairly significant move on our part. There are many leaders in Action SA who've been around a hell of a lot longer and who are, contributing to the party for longer. And yet the organization was unanimous to say, let's make sure there's a seat at the table. Let's make sure they are part of our agenda. And let's make sure that they feel like they're at home politically. And already I think what we are seeing is a huge amount of their people coming on board. They have over 42,000 members. And those people are all coming on board very, very rapidly, in such a way that Action SA has increased overnight its footprint in the country.
And has that been concluded, or does do they have? Is it now under the Action SA banner, or is there still
It's concluded. It's signed. It's done and dusted. The ceremony was had in front of the media last week, Wednesday. And we're now at that very important part of a merger, which happens behind the cameras, but is actually the most important part, where you're assimilating the organizations, you are ensuring that we bring people on board based on merit into key roles in the organization, and ensuring that all the structures of Action SA benefit from the leadership of both parties going forward, which is vital for us. A local government election is exactly that. It's local. You've got to be service delivery oriented. You've got to be building structures on the ground that are speaking to people about the issues that matter most to them. And this is why this particular orientation is just massively important to us.
Yeah. Now, there's also been talks of other collaborations, and that is with the, let's call them the entrepreneurial parties that are in Parliament, where it seems to be they've been built just to give a job for the leader. You're in discussion, Rise Mzansi, Build One South Africa, good. UDM, I presume he's available for any discussion. How is that progressing?
So I'm going to have to watch what I say quite carefully here, because we're at a fairly sensitive stage of discussions, and we want to be respectful to the parties we're engaging with. The reports of the engagement with Good and the UDM are misstated.
Right.
We're engaging principally, as it relates to parties in Parliament, with Rise Mzansi and BOSA. There have been a series of conversations which, certainly are demonstrating that there's a will. They're very much explorative in nature at this point. And we are assessing a number of options in terms of what kind of relationships we could have. I think a lot of people, jump straight to, marriage and,
yeah.
whatever.
And we'll
when
date
in fact,
later, yeah.
when in fact, dating is perfectly fine. And, also understand from a parliamentary point of view, even cooperation at that level becomes massively important. The point was made to me the other day that if those three parties alone were to cooperate in Parliament, their speaking time on each item collectively would be more than MK. Now, those kind of things matter. Our ability to have representation in the 30-something committees of Parliament matter. And if we can start to build those kind of collaborations in the rational centre of opposition politics in South Africa, that will be hugely helpful. But what it's going to require of all parties is a degree of humility. I think this election humbled a lot of political parties, Action SA included, and it requires you to have a serious introspection and to understand from a South African resident point of view, South African citizen point of view, that we need to stop standing on, high horses about what we think makes us special and different from one another, and ask from a resident point of view, do they think there's a need for these parties all to be distinct, or should they be working together in their interests? Because when you look at the number of the policy offerings, there certainly are differences, there's no question. But are those differences so great that we shouldn't collaborate in the interests of the real problems facing South Africa in terms of its economy, joblessness, crime, the rule of law, etc.? And I don't think it is.
Yeah.
The good thing about what we're seeing in these engagements is it appears the other parties seem to feel the same way as well.
Now, obviously, what is going to make that partnership work or not work is going to be around ideology, one would imagine, because that would be the area, the biggest pothole, while we keep the Johannesburg thing alive, the biggest pothole to that working is ideological differences. Now, pre the election, there was one major difference between Action SA and Build One South Africa and Rise Mzansi. They adopted a strategy, and I had many discussions with both of those parties on this platform, which I call the United Party strategy, which in the 70s, when the burning question was what to do about apartheid, and the United Party still as the official opposition, their line was something approximating, we'll keep apartheid, we'll just do it better. Right? Build One South Africa and Rise are basically the policies of the ANC, but they'll just do it better. Action SA was quite strident in saying we're going to remove race-based policies, we are going to be free marketeers, property rights guaranteed, etc. Those two parties are not on the same page. Who's going to change here?
Well, that's all going to have to be part of a conversation. From our point of view, I think the characterization of those parties as being kind of ANC lights a bit unfair.
Why?
I think there are...
What makes that unfair? Because I'm saying from a manifesto perspective, they're identical. I can't see what is unfair. It's just like we just won't be so corrupt.
I don't think they are identical for what it's worth. But from our point of view as well, I think, Mike, we've got to understand that South Africa, firstly, is going towards a local government election. And the orientation of what we will be working to put together is going to be oriented towards the election right in front of us, which is of a local government nature. At the end of the day, you've got to appreciate that local government and the nature of the challenges faced by South Africans really are such that parties across the spectrum can agree that we need better roads, we need electricity, we need water, and we need the basics of local government to work. I always share the story, but when Herman Mashaba was mayor of Joburg, he had the Freedom Front Plus and the EFF voting together on budgets, because ultimately everyone believes in basic services. So I think it's very helpful to begin these kind of talks with that particular orientation in mind, and to perhaps understand that there are models of cooperation that allow for the individuality of political parties working together. You look at the model in Botswana of what the UDC has achieved, and I know there are certain challenges there now, but what they've achieved is quite special, and they've done it in a way where the individuality of the political parties involved has been retained to some extent, because South Africa is a diverse country. There's a lot of different ideas about how we fix our country. And ultimately, creating the space for political parties to have slight nuances and differences to the questions of how we fix our country is not a bad thing. Firstly, from a point of view of representing more and more people, but politically from our point of view, because if you want 1 + 1 to equal 3, you don't want to assimilate and become a clone of one another. You want to create the space that brings more people with you. I think finally, though, and this is the important part from our standpoint, is we mustn't become like policy ayatollahs and kind of stand on the things that we disagree with, when in fact what South Africans want to know is, can we grow an economy and can we create jobs? Can we have a working criminal justice system and a rule of law? And I think even with policy differences as it relates to various things, the point is these things can be achieved by working together with like-minded parties. And I think there's enough in common to be able to provide credible answers as to how we will do those things.
Yeah, because, obviously there's some pressing problems that face South Africa. And actually, ideologically, perhaps South Africa is drawing into a couple of camps. Both the DA and the ANC seem to be very comfortable with massive government. We see yet another scandal at Petro SA. Not a word out of the DA on issues like that. But you potentially going into a partnership with people that are all for big government, all for inefficient business.
Well, again, I'm not sure I agree with that characterization. We have been involved in a fairly extensive process of studying policies and manifestos. And while I acknowledge that there are differences and nuances between the organizations, in fact, I don't just acknowledge it, I celebrate it, because going back to my earlier point, I think it's going to produce a stronger outcome for the country and for the political parties working together. At the end of the day, I'm quite convinced that when it comes to the key agenda items of change, we can find common ground in that nature, because, Mike, the future of South African politics is in coalition. I think this is a well-established fact. We all accepted that. If the premise of our work is that we cannot do anything if we're working with people who hold different opinions, then we really should pack up and go and find some other line of work. From our point of view, you have to learn how to work with people with differing views. But I'd still believe that when it comes to the question of the public purse and how we can achieve more, the idea of streamlining the civil service and ensuring more money is redirected towards the key resident and citizen-centric programs that drive change in our country can be achieved. What you're seeing right now in the GNU, which is hugely concerning, is just the complete loss of the individual parties' agendas, which I think is absolutely tragic. And let's not make it about the DA alone. There's other parties that have joined the GNU and are working with the ANC. And quite frankly, they're all abandoning what it is they said they stood for before the election. And they are failing to grasp the fact that that president governs with their support. They have every right to say to that president, we will not support you unless you streamline this cabinet and make it a smaller place. We will not support you if you are not able to reduce the excessive spend on blue light vehicles, on international travel. We won't support you if you're going to pass NHI, Bella, etc. And we're not going to support you if you double down on BEE, the latest revelation coming out this week. And yet it appears the comfort of those leather seats and those German sedans is just too much to avoid.
Yeah. Now, I know that unavoidably, by all accounts, Mayor Moya, if we can go back there, within the first month of her taking office, went on a trip to Brazil. Is that the last of her international travel?
Well, again, I think it's quite important to say what is spent on a trip and what returns are being produced courtesy of it. So let's clarify firstly that that trip was paid for by the international body that was hosting that conference. So the residents of Tshwane weren't being hit with the bills that we're seeing out of the GNU cabinet. Action SA's GNU tracker is posing questions to ministers in the GNU that has now established a total, and I say a total to date, because there's a lot of ministers who haven't yet responded, of 45 million rand on international travel. I mean, Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, so that's local government and traditional affairs, who happens to be the president of the IFP, Velenkosini Tlhabisa, has spent over 11 million rand on travel. Now, why would you need to travel if your portfolio is local government, Mike, local, and traditional affairs, which traditional affairs in South Africa is very South African. It's not like you can go to visit Buckingham Palace and study traditional affairs. So at the end of the day, it just strikes me that there's a huge difference in the way these things are being handled. And might I add, when it came to the Brazil trip, the reason why the mayor went was her attendance was necessary to bring that conference, next one, to South Africa, to Gauteng, where the economic spin-offs of having an international conference in your city is very significant.
Okay, so as we sort of head to our conclusion, Action SA is living up to its name. A lot of action, a lot happening in the local government space. Are you confident that you'll recoup the ground that you lost in the general election versus your performance in the 2021 local government election?
Yeah, we're absolutely confident. And I think you've got to understand the difference between a local government and a national election. Action SA's performance in 2021 was driven because of a local government orientation that we had, courtesy of the Herman Mashaba mayoralty in Johannesburg and the legacy of that government and its track record. The challenge for us nationally and provincially, aside from all of the other push and pull factors and MK and the disruption to the electoral marketplace, is we had to contest 2024 nationally without a single MP in the National Assembly. So to try and demonstrate relevance in a national context when you don't yet have a foot in the door is a massively challenging exercise. We're going back to local government again, where Action SA has an orientation. I think people like their action local in particular. And we have very exciting programs between assimilating political parties, growing our structures on the ground, and being the only voice of local government while GNU partners are too busy dealing with what German sedan they're being driven around in this week, where we can be the sole voice talking into communities suffering from local government in South Africa. And I think that collectively is going to produce a recipe that's going to make Action SA a serious contender in these elections.
Yeah, and your impression as a party, now having been in Parliament for, 7 months or so, being in the car park, in the tent?
Well, I mean, it's been fascinating. Herman and I made the decision consciously to let others take up those seats and not to go and take them up ourselves. I think it's turned out to be an excellent choice because we have 6 members of Parliament and we've given them the task of punching above their weight and feeling like 60. And under the leadership of Athol Trollip, who is probably one of the most experienced politicians and members of Parliament in South Africa, and someone with serious credibility in that role, we're punching far above our weight. We're holding government to account. We've got ministers in this GNU dancing. And I can tell you right now, they're going to think twice before they jump on their next plane or climb in the next blue light, because Action SA is doing the work of the opposition and we're doing it really, really well.
Well, let's hope somebody does it, because, my Lord, we haven't really seen an improvement in governance. More corruption scandals. One would presume that now that there's a corruption scandal in the presidency, Cyril Ramaphosa will find another way to hide that particular problem with Kumbutso Tshwane. Going to be very interesting to watch that story develop. Let us know what you think about local government, especially people in the city of Tshwane. Are you seeing a difference? Is the new mayoralty, Mayor Moya, making a difference? The one thing that I can say, and I said it earlier, at least Action SA is showing some enthusiasm for the job, right? Which is, here in Gauteng, you must understand that this place is bereft of any enthusiasm or anybody who wants to fix the problems that face residents daily. And for that, we've got to acknowledge. Well done, Michael. Good luck with your new partnerships and your talks. And and thank you for always responding to my invitations for being here. To everybody that joined us today, support Pace Car Rental. Go to their website, use our code SONA and get a discount on your next hire car. Subscribe to this channel. We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Michael Beaumont, thank you very much.
Always good. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.